Hey, welcome everybody to Fire Engineering's Humpday Hangout, to our show, the issues and challenges in today's fire service. I'm Chief Rick Lasky, along with my good friend and Humpday Hangout partner, Chief Terry McGrath from Lewisville. Terry's working with one of our guests through a little technical problem right now. We'll get them on here shortly. But and a quick reminder, we do this all the time, yet nobody seems to do it. Remember, if you have any questions, jump on Twitter and shoot them out to us. Just remember to add hashtag FE Talk for Fire Engineering Talk. I know a lot of you like to send messages to us, and I'll be watching my phone as well as some others, but it helps a lot if you can do that, folks. So hashtag FE Talk. Today, Terry and I are hanging with actually 3 and 4 with Chief Halton, incredible fire service leaders and mentors. We've got FDNY Deputy Chief Jay Jonas. We'll have hopefully Battalion Chief John Salka with us shortly, and Captain Mike Dugan, and the boss, Chief Bobby Halton. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, and we were just talking, folks, before we went live. Before we kick things off, we need to just discuss a couple of quick things here, and we need to pay tribute. It's so sad. It seems like we do this every show, but to Hanover County, Virginia, Lieutenant Brad Clark, this last Thursday at 9 p.m. They were getting off the rig, just getting off the rig. The blocking engine was like not even 2 miles behind him. Actually saw the wreck, and Lieutenant Clark was taken from us, a semi-rear end in their fire engine. Like I said, for those of you asking questions, and you've asked before, the blocking engine was like just right behind him. This happened right away. Chief Halton was talking earlier before we went on. We've talked with our good friend Chief Eddie Buchanan a couple of times past few days about the lieutenant actually saving his guys' lives by yelling and screaming and hollering at him to get back because he saw the rig coming. This is a lieutenant. This is a brother firefighter that teaches all over the country. He's a mentor. He's an incredible person, and we're gonna miss him tremendously. And one thing about Brad is he'll always be there with us. He'll always be teaching with us because of the impact he's had will always be felt. So today is his memorial, and we just want to pay a little tribute to him, and please keep him and his family in your thoughts and prayers. Bobby, do you want to give a little update on the rest of the crew?
Yeah, Chief Buchanan was kind enough to update us, and one of the other crew members, they're still both still in the hospital. One of them has lost his leg, and his first question once he was extubated and able to talk was, how soon can I come back with my prosthetic? So the chief said, whenever you're ready, son. And it was his first day on the job. He literally, their probationary ceremony was scheduled for that evening. And so just to keep him in your thoughts and prayers as well. We know he'll be back. Just a terrible tragedy. And I know Chief Jonas has an update on our brother from FDNY as well. So I'll turn it over to Chief Jonas.
Yeah, Jay, John was asking earlier if you could give us an update when you got on there about the firefighter that fell.
Yeah, we had a firefighter fall from a 35-foot portable ladder while he was trying to access the roof of a 3-story 2-occupancy building. It was like a split 2-family occupancy, class 3, ordinary construction. And I'm not sure what the chain of events are yet. They haven't started the investigation of how he fell. But he fell, and he fell easily 30 feet. He fractured his heel, and he has some fractures of his vertebrae. He has some bone fragments that are close to his spinal cord. He had surgery 2 days ago to remove them. The surgeons went in from the rear, and today he has the same surgery, and the surgeons are going in from the front to remove those bone fragments from around his spinal cord. I spoke to him yesterday. He was upbeat. He was awake. He was coherent, and I was, which surprised me. I expected to see him unconscious, lying in the bed, but he was carrying on a conversation, and he was in a lot of discomfort, and that there was, he had a morphine pump and it wasn't doing much for his discomfort. So it kind of tells you where he's at. So keep him in your prayers today. Hope all goes well, takes some of the pressure off his spine, and he comes through.
And Jay, he's if I read right, is it 12 or 15 year veteran of the FDNY?
I think 12, yeah.
12, yeah. So, well, thoughts and prayers his way as well, and to everybody in Hanover. We didn't want to start the show off. I know Bobby and I talked about it earlier, and Terry we wanted to talk about the Hanover guys and make sure people were thinking about them. And then I know John Salka earlier, Jay had asked about an update and thought it'd be perfect with you coming on to be able to.
Yeah.
So.
Like I said, I went to see him yesterday morning. His parents were there and a couple of firemen from a neighboring house. And he was, he was holding court. He was, he was entertaining everybody. But as I was talking to him, he says, "Oh man, I'm in a lot of pain." So, he's putting on a brave face. And I just told him, I said, "Look, there's a lot of people talking about you. There's a lot of people praying for you. There's a lot of positive energy coming your way. This is just know that, and you'll get through." So.
Well, and I'm a big believer. I know Mike is. Prayer works, man. Prayer works. So, hey, John, do we got you, buddy?
Finally.
Hey, there you are. There you are. Terry, you're a miracle worker, man. I'm telling you. Terry has.
Which brings me back to one of my favorite phrases: technology sucks.
Terry has worked with more of our guests to get them straightened out than.
Oh, he did. He took care of me.
You get the hiccups once in a while and everything else, but hey, for our listeners, for our viewers, today's the anniversary of the 23rd Street fire collapse, October 17th, 1966, and we Terry and I were talking about this when we were talking about subjects a while back, and we thought what an incredible day to remember those we lost that day, and talk maybe about the incident, lessons learned. And we couldn't think of three better guests to have than John Salka, Mike Dugan, and Jay Jonas. And for those of our viewers that haven't seen it yet, then we need you to bombard him with emails telling him he needs to do a book on this stuff. Deputy Chief Jay Jonas does these newsletters for Division 7 and a whole bunch of other people that are absolutely John, you love reading those newsletters. I mean, you and I have talked about that, John, before, that he needs to do a book on them, doesn't he?
Absolutely. And I know I've talked to Jay briefly about that on several different occasions, and there's several different opportunities and some different, from different places to do that. And I think, when I read the stories, I'm one of the 20 or 30,000 people that he sends it to. You got to see that list of people on his emails when he sends out his new newsletter. But I'm just one of them, and I don't even open it until I know I got 15 or 20 or 30 minutes to sit down and really read it and keep reading it and absorb it. And it being my job, being in the FDNY, I know half the guys he's talking about. Half the time that's one of the great things about Jay's stories is he really dives into the research, and he goes to the firehouses and gets the fire reports and write down the lieutenant's names and the firefighter's name and who had the nozzle and the guy that had the irons, and half of the guys are guys that grew up with me in the job, or guys ahead of us on the job, ahead of Mike and I and Jay, guys that we emulated, guys that were our mentors and our heroes, and I feel like I'm back in the firehouse and I'm reading them stories. I could talk for another half an hour about how good the stories are and how accurate they are and how positive they are. They're great.
The only thing I would correct you on, John, is that 15 or 20 minutes just gets you past the first page. So
no, you're right. You're right.
I take the afternoon off because it's worth you taking the time to read every line carefully. I mean, literally every paragraph has a lesson, a takeaway, an insight. Probably one of the most brilliant fire service writers of all time, and totally devoted to the FDNY and his job. And it comes through. And every time I see one, I'm like, man, print that bad boy out. Hang on to that.
Well,
Yeah.
that was the thing. Terry and I talked about was, let's talk about the 23rd Street fire and collapse, and with the newsletter, the report that Jay did, and the interviews, and it was right away. We thought we got to get Jay in there. So if I can set things up for our viewers a little bit prior. And this comes right off of Jay's work, and we're going to turn things over to Jay and John and Mike here in a second. But prior to September 11, 2001, the greatest, life loss at a single incident in the history of the New York City Fire Department was this collapse. We lost 12 very brave firefighters. So there's going to be some things these guys are going to talk about that are just not to play it down, but this is the kind of stuff when you talk about bravery that movies are made about, and they don't even do it justice as to what some of the firefighters and officers did at this fire trying to get to their fallen. But every rank except for the rank of captain was touched by this tragedy. 1 deputy, 1 battalion chief, 2 lieutenants, and 8 firefighters. And we talked about the Hanover Bobby. One of the firefighters that was killed this day was a probationary firefighter as well. So, Jay, we wanted to kick things off to you, buddy, and let's all run with this, and let's talk about this incident, the lessons learned, and honor those that we lost that day.
Well, like I said, prior to September 11th, this was the greatest loss of life in the New York City Fire Department for a span of 35 years. And it was kind of a landmark event in other ways. That seemed to be the kickoff of the vast firestorm that the city experienced. You had a young, brand new chief of department in John T. O'Hagan. He was new to the job in 1966. And it started out with a man who was living with his family on the top floor of a building on 22nd Street. They just smelled smoke. And the backstory to the buildings, these buildings were interconnected, and they weren't, these interconnections were not approved by the buildings department. So you had these buildings, 2 buildings that were actually interconnected. So they went from 22nd Street to 23rd Street. And so there was all kinds of alterations being done to this building that were not approved, and the fire department didn't know about. So there was a setback of this building on 22nd Street that connected the buildings on 23rd Street, and that's where the fire originated, in this setback, and the fire just communicated both ways. It communicated to 22nd Street and 23rd Street. And firefighters went down into the cellar, and they couldn't figure out where the fire was coming from. There was a false concrete wall, and they thought that they were at the end of this cellar occupancy, but they weren't. On the other side of that concrete wall was, the interconnection, and that's where the fire was, so they couldn't get to it. One of the without going into all the interconnections and everything, one of the big points about this fire, is one of the big takeaways, was one of the occupancies on the 23rd Street side was there was 3 stores, but one of them was the Wonder Drug Store. And it's the pictures of it before the fire seemed like a very nice place. And they put down a terrazzo floor on top of the existing floor. And terrazzo is a mixture of concrete and marble chips, and it's polished, and it looks nice, and it's easy to maintain, but it adds a significant dead load to the building, undesigned. And so not only do you have this undesigned dead load, but it's so thick it insulates the upper floor from anything that's going on below. So you had this raging fire below, and it was barely detectable in the drugstore. You had a light smoke condition, and they were looking around and they couldn't find it until the floor beams were eaten away, and they reached their yield point, and the whole floor collapsed, and you had 10 firemen that actually fell into the inferno. 2 of them were on the periphery of the floor, and those 2 received fatal burns. So you had 10 firemen that fell in and 2 that stayed on the floor, but they didn't fare any better.
And Jay, you and I talked about this earlier. I was a guest on, got asked to join Bobby Ryan Pennington on his podcast yesterday, and we were talking yesterday about today's show, and he was like, "Yeah, we had 7 firefighters die here years ago. Terrazzo floor, same thing, insulated it, like you had said before. The fire is attacking and eating away at those floor joists, and you really don't." You don't know it. And it's kind of the same thing that happened to Joe Samick, December 6, 1989, where they had sunk they were refurbing this place, cut down, sunk down, dropped the pan, had poured that thick sand, slurry concrete mixture, that flat, so they could lay the terrazzo, and it kind of sneaks up on you. And it's happened in so many places. Again, like you said, you don't know. And when it goes in, it's too late.
Right. Well, and, that goes, to the, when we go out on building inspection, you should be inquisitive. You should be looking around and say, all right, what's holding up this floor? Is this designed to hold this kind of a thing? And that's something we can do before a fire even starts to maybe save somebody's life.
All the more. And John, you've talked before about the FDNY's change, especially after the Deutsch building, when it comes to BIs, to building inspections. I know when we do our classes, you hammer away, John, on how important it is to get out and look at these buildings ahead of time and get downstairs. And it's not just a hassle, and it's not just busy work, that this is critically important, getting out and pre-planning or doing the BIs ahead of time.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, at one point before I retired, I did a very unscientific analysis, because I'm a pretty unscientific guy, I'm told. And I frankly, what I did was the math. I did the math for BI, for building inspection. They don't call it BI anymore, right, Jay? They call it not even AFID. What's it called now? Something new, right?
BISP, Building Inspection Safety Program.
Yeah, even we in the FDNY like reinventing stuff every year and every 2 years and every 10 years. But anyway, I started doing the math. And if you do 5 firefighters and an officer per company and 400 companies, and FDNY companies are scheduled at least to go out 3 times a week for 3 hours. That's 9 hours. I mean, I'm sure everybody doesn't get the full 9 hours in between runs and this and that and everything else, but I came up with a figure between 600 and 700,000 man hours. If you start adding up the man hours of building inspection every year, it's a lot of time. We spend a lot of time doing it. And listen, I was never a big fan. I'm not going to lie. I was never a big fan. I was never wringing my hands together saying, oh gosh, I can't wait to go out on BI today. I never did that. However, you still can recognize how really important it is to get out there, like Jay just said, and familiarize yourself with the building and be asking yourself questions. Mike, you worked in Crown Heights and 123, right? I mean, some of these neighborhoods, Jay and I both worked on the Lower East Side, old buildings. Getting into these buildings and knowing, and like Frank Brannigan said, who was what? Wasn't it just his 100th birthday? Frank Brannigan's 100th birthday or something? Know the enemy and know your buildings, and it's so important to get out and do that. And my second point, and I've made this point in articles, and I've made it at seminars, and I've made it in lots of different places. What are you looking under the desk for, Halton? And
it's Izzy, my golden retriever.
and here's my point, and this is an important point. I don't want the giggling to get in the way of the important point. Paid fire departments like New York and lots of others go out on building inspection. They have it blocked out in the day. They have assigned periods, or even without assigned periods, they go out and do it. And shame on the places, paid career departments that don't do it. But that's still not my point. My point is the volunteer fire service. And I wrote an article about that. Know your building. And I know very few volunteer fire departments. And some of them cover and protect and respond to quite developed suburban and even urban settings, and very few of them go out and do any kind of building inspection or familiarization at all. And I really think that it's a gigantic void in the volunteer fire service that they need to address in some way, shape, or form. I know they have a lot of challenges now, the modern day volunteer fire service, but we can't keep talking about it and making a point about it and banging our fists about it and going to funerals and then not do anything about it. I said, even if you went out once a month and you said, okay, guys, we're going to go out instead of drill on Wednesday night, Saturday morning, we're going to go to the supermarket and walk around before they open. And then next month, we're going to go to the hardware store on Main Street and check the basement out, you know, on Sunday morning before they open. I'm sure you can get store owners and building owners to, you know, to cooperate with that. But I'm not going to belabor the point. But the point is, everybody, whether you're career, whether you're a combination, or even in small volunteer departments, the first time you enter a building should not be the day that it's on fire. Well,
and Mike, this building that we're talking about, Jay described it in the newsletter, which is more than just like I said, it's incredible. The buildings, I mean, how chopped up, the need to get out and walk around when you can, or just, I mean, I was reading this. I told Jay I read this. I read it when he first put it out. I read it again. I read it over on the airplane the other day. I read it when I got home. And I was like, golly, man, there was about 50 different ways to get in and around these buildings, how they're all connected. And like Jay says, some legally, some illegally. But it's just amazing, Mike, on how chopped up the building is or was.
It definitely is. And I so agree with John that we have to get out and go into the buildings. I remember being in Crown Heights and going to a supermarket to do an inspection. And the guys went up the stairs and found illegal apartments upstairs. No secondary means of egress, no windows, no nothing. And they were housing people up there to help the supermarket owner make his rent. And it happens. This is what goes on. You have to get out of the building. And the other thing, because I think it's so important, Vinnie Fowler, who died in the line of duty, was a fireman. He was a captain when he was killed in the FDNY in a basement in Queens. But Vinnie Fowler started a notebook in Ladder 123, and they still keep it up. And it's called the Fowler Notebook. And he went to buildings and he took pictures. This is back in the day before cell phone cameras, where you took a picture, had to go to a store, a drugstore, and get the picture developed. It was a lot of work, but he drew the blueprints of the layouts of the floor plans in this notebook of the buildings. 30 years later, guys are still looking at these buildings and how they are built. If you are in a volunteer fire department now, with a cell phone, you can take a picture anywhere you go. Digital cameras, put them on a PowerPoint in the firehouse, so a guy can come in there and familiarize himself with the local movie theater, the local supermarket, and everything else. We have to pass this information on, because what we see today might not save us, but in 10 or 15 years, when someone else is riding our rig or our kids are on the rig, it might save their life.
If I could jump in for a second, Ricky, I think what John said was really, really significant. You know, we think about Joey D, and I know Jay and John and Mikey can speak more to Joey D's incident, and we think of Howie Carpluck with the Family Dollar, where the business owners had taken out some supports in the floor, I believe, if I'm not mistaken there. So as Jay and John and everyone here is saying, many times we look at these very substantial older buildings, and although they were very substantial when they were built, it was to carry the load that they were designed for, back to Jay's original point. And with additions and modifications and such, it gets to be very, very dicey when you go into these buildings on fire, right? And the terrazzo floors and a brick wall. When Jay wrote about that and I read that, if I came up to a brick wall inside a building, I would think that I was at the exterior wall. Nothing else would come into my mind. And so, you know, being able to really get inside these buildings, and to John's point, I'm a volunteer firefighter right now, and he's exactly right. And you know, we could go out and go into buildings, and we're not the city at that point in time. We're not looking to carry a violation book. We're not looking to impose in any way. We're just looking to find out what we can about the buildings, because my community right now, and I work a lot with the good folks here in Owasso, it's just like a lot of communities around America today. The older downtown stuff is coming back to life. It's being gentrified in the upper levels. The young folks are moving back in there, and down below, they're gutting those older buildings, and they're bringing in new occupancies. And how they're doing it, to the point of Jay's newsletter and to the point of John's earlier comments and Mike's, it has tremendous ramifications when things go wrong, and they invariably will. And so, great points by everybody. And you know, I just think the lessons are too numerous out there to ignore. And thank you, Jay, for what you do, and John for what you do to keep bringing these points home.
My last comment, I just want to make one more quick comment on that, and I'll make it short, is, you know, you see so many guys out there, and I'm not being critical in any way, shape, or form by what I'm about to say, but you see guys out there that have, you know, degrees in building construction and all sorts of books, textbooks, and studies and programs and building construction for the fire service. I mean, look what Vinnie Dunn did for us, right? And National Fire Academy has a host of programs and courses. And that if people spent as much time studying and uncovering the buildings in their response area as they did studying the technical facts and the science of building construction. I got guys that can recite what temperature, what kind of truss starts to fail at, and how long it has to be, and how long it'll expand. Yet you drive down the main street in their town, and I point to the building, and they can't tell me if it's 10 years old or 40 years old, if it's lightweight construction or heavy construction. So there are categories, there are groups of, you know, there are of information, and some of the technical, you know, building construction information is really good, but it's all absolutely useless unless you know what the buildings that you respond to are. You can know all you want about lightweight buildings, and if you don't know which buildings in your district are lightweight, you've wasted your time studying. You know, so we really have to take that knowledge and apply it to our buildings in our districts and on our streets. So
That's a great point. Great point. And, you know, and Jay, I don't want to get too far down the line here, but, you know, we mentioned Frank Brannigan and the impact he had in the fire service.
Yeah.
You know, Deputy Chief Vinnie Dunn has been like a hero to so many, and I just can't imagine you think about the impact that man's had on the fire service. But there's a couple of people that are going to ring out as you walk us through this fire. You know, Vinnie Dunn and what happened at that incident, and then Lieutenant Fox's other cellar fire. There's two people there. Now, again, I don't want to get too far down on the fire there, so if I am, you know, back it up a little bit. But I'm sitting here thinking about those two that we talked about the other day right now.
Yeah, well, before I lose my train of thought, just I want to piggyback on what everybody was just talking about. For the most part, as far as the fire service is concerned, if you come upon an alteration, unless that alteration is the installation of a sprinkler system, that alteration is bad for the fire service. If they're dropping ceilings, it creates a void. If they're replacing structural elements with lightweight materials, that's bad for the fire service. You know, if they're running wiring or piping up through the floors, they're piercing fire protection. So, you know, the scourge of renovations and alterations has been hounding the fire service from very early years. But, you know, when I write these newsletters, there's always a story behind the story, you know. And you mentioned Vinnie Dunn. Vinnie Dunn was a brand new lieutenant assigned to Engine 33 at this fire, and you know, the longer I've gotten to know Vinnie and talk to him, he's kind of like the Where's Waldo of the fire service. You know, he was a probationary fireman. He went to the Worcester Street collapse. You know, he was a lieutenant at the 23rd Street collapse. He investigated wall bombs. You know, so he's been on the forefront of many things. And he was standing next to Joe Priori, the lieutenant from Engine 18, and it was just the luck of the draw. He was assigned to the building that was the exposure 2 side of the fire building, and Joe Priori and Engine 18 went into the Wonder Drug Store. He says, and that was just the luck of the draw. You know, so you know, I asked him about it. He says, you know, his initial impetus about thinking about building construction came from the Worcester Street collapse, and all these events that he responded to certainly compounded that, and up to and including wall bombs. He said wall bombs was my kickoff point. That's when I really started writing in earnest. But the other real interesting backstory to this is a man named Royal Fox. Royal Fox is just passed away about 2 or 3 months ago, and he was the father-in-law to one of the captains that's assigned to my division. And I interviewed him for 2 different fires. The first fire I interviewed him for was a fire that happened in 1960 on the corner of Grand Street and Broadway, and it was a fire where 3 firemen were killed in a cellar fire, and it was the cellar was starting to get hot, and it was in a loft building. It was the loft building district of Lower Manhattan, with what's known as Hell's 100 Acres, and he was in Squad 8, and they were down in the cellar. They were trying to find the fire. The fire was so intense that they would open up the hand line, and the water would turn to steam when it hit the masonry exterior walls, and they couldn't find it. There was a lot of bolts of textiles that were in the cellar, and that was adding fuel to the fire. And finally, they decided, you know what, it's time for us to go. We got to go. And him and another fireman from Squad 8, the guy's name was Bob Barnacle, and they decided to exit the cellar. And as they were about to reach the ceiling level of the cellar, which led to the doorway going to the first floor, that whole area ignited in flame, and they retreated. And Royal Fox was talking to Bob Barnacle, we got to go up. And they went up again, and Bob stalled, and Royal Fox put his shoulder into him, and he pushed him, and he carried him up the stairs. And they both got severely burned, but they lived. And so that, and that the 3 guys that remained in the cellar perished. And there was 2 guys from a lieutenant and a fireman from Engine 31 and a fireman from Squad 8. And fast forward to October 17th, 1966. Royal Fox gets promoted to lieutenant. And his first tour as a lieutenant is working in Ladder Company 3. And he's working the night tour of, October 17th, 1966. He's the first dude truck at the 23rd Street collapse. And he and his men and all of Engine 5 are in the cellar of the building on 23rd Street. And a fireman who was at the street level from Engine 5 felt an enormous heat rush come up from the cellar. And he radioed the guys down below that you got to get out. You got to get out of the cellar. And so he told the guys, look, we got to get out of here. We got to get out of the cellar. And that's the way to go. The way we came in is the way we got to go. There's no other way out. And it's going to hurt, but that's the only way out. And he got all of Engine 5 and all of Ladder 3 up through this thermal layer of tremendous heat until it was just him and one other guy. Eerily similar to what he did 6 years earlier at Grand Street and Broadway. And the guy didn't want to go up through the fire. And he says, listen, he says, that's the only way out. We stay down here with them. And he put his shoulder into him again, and he pushed him and carried him, and they went up the stairs. And the guys outside reached in and grabbed them, and their coats were so hot, if you didn't have gloves on, you couldn't touch them. They were that hot. And they got burned, but they lived. And he received the medal for that. He received the William F. Conrad Medal for the fire at 23rd Street. I spoke to Benny Dunn about it. I says, if it wasn't for Royal Fox, we would have had 20 guys dead at 23rd Street. So it was just, again, a story behind the story that for such a tragic day could have been worse.
Well, it's just like we talked about before, you know, and again, not to sound too dramatic, but I think God puts people in certain places at certain times, and you know, these are the things, Jay and Bobby and Mike and John and Terry, that we, you know, it's kind of the back matter, the stories we don't ever hear about. You know, there's a lot of people, very, very nice, very polite, great people out there posting today about the, you know, remembering this incident and those that we lost that day. But those kinds of stories, you know, I think that's, Bobby, that's important for our viewers and listeners to hear, that, you know, your impact is always, it's always about the next fire, the next incident. You know, we've talked about the importance of pre-plans and getting out and checking your buildings and you know, what they're doing nowadays to the buildings from back then. But the importance, Bobby, and again, thank God fire engineering went back and digitized every single magazine. I think they were doing like 1 or 2 a week back in the old days, in the long time ago, and they're all accessible now. And you can read these articles, right, Bobby, with information, just like with the stuff that people, I think, forget about, that Jay just told us that you wouldn't hear. I don't think you'd really hear that if you read about the 23rd Street fire, unless it was brought up by someone like Jay. I mean, Bobby, we've got some great stuff, you know, where we can reach back the importance of that history.
Yeah, no, we've got 142 years worth of fire service history in there, and obviously, you know, John came on before that time, so we don't have all of Chief Salka's career, but we captured it. I had to do that, John. I couldn't resist. So I wouldn't do it to Jay because he can kick my butt, but not that you can.
So, you should be in comedy. You should be in comedy. Yeah.
Listen, so, but it's fascinating, and what Jay is doing for us, and not to get all wonky, but you know, we learn through stories, right? Stories are how we capture, because we think in pictures. So when you read these incredibly well-written pieces by Jay, you feel like you're there. You know, you feel like you're hearing it, you know, from the men, and at that time they were all men, but from the folks who were actually on scene and involved, and Jay captures these things so well. And you're exactly right. When we hear these stories, it helps us to not only connect with the folks who came before us, but to pick up things that we should be doing now, right? And you know, the job, for lack of a better term, has gotten so complicated and so complex, with a myriad of other things we've got to be concerned about, right? And they're all important things. I'm not diminishing anything else we do, but at the end of the day, what's going to kill you, you know, 99.9% of the time is fire, and you know, and nowadays traffic obviously is a huge issue. But you know, Brannigan, to quote, you know, dear Chief Brannigan again, who was just such an important part of my life growing up, because his daughter lived in Albuquerque, and I was chief there. So when Chief Brannigan would come in, you know, we had unfettered access to him, and he loved to teach and speak, as Jay and John know. So we would get him down to our academy, and we'd have dinner with him, and you know, it was just neat to be able to listen to this guy who, like Jay, he would tell you the stories, and he'd say, "Now, Tommy O'Brien was on the corner here, you see, and O'Doherty was over here. Now, O'Doherty had a little problem with the bottle, so from time to time you had to, you know, and he not only did he know who was there, he knew, you know, and O'Doherty had 3 kids. I think one of them became a cop, and you know, but he was right, and so, you know, he would bring it to life, as Jay is doing for us. And when we bring those stories to life, you know, we pay attention, and it's about learning, it's about legacy, it's about, and it's an important life lessons. And today we're kind of focused on renovation, and I love what Jay just said, the scourge of renovation, and now we have these subdivided private dwellings that are, man, oh man, and that's some scary stuff. I mean, you know, probably John and Jay and Mike can speak to it, you know, really eloquently, because the city has been dealing with it for generations. But every firefighter in America should be aware that that is happening in your neighborhoods, and you know, you can go in the front door and suddenly be met with 2 doors and a wall and a staircase to the stairway that used to just go to the upstairs is now, a whole separate living quarters, and you could have a kitchen where there used to be a bathroom. And so, we really got to get on top of that. And how we do it is by telling the stories, right? And keep telling them. And one of the big problems we have today, and I know Jay is still, Jay's still on the job, so he can talk to it too, is that there's so many lawyers out there today, and no disrespect to lawyers. Having come from New York, I think everybody should own a lawyer. But the problem is that a lot of our folks today are very inhibited to tell their stories because they're worried about the litigation that's coming, and that's a shame. That's a shame. We ought to be able to just tell about the fire, what we did, what we encountered, without having to run it through city legal. And it's unfortunate that that's happening, but thank God we've got guys like the men on this, and Terry, who's out there, kicking butt every day, who can tell us what's happening. And so, thank you all for this really important deal. And a young man named Kyle Samsung the other day tweeted out a photo of 2 private dwellings side by side, with some interesting door patterns. Jay, you'd love this. Side by side, almost like the modern day brownstone, but the way they're building these things. One had the 2 doors in the middle that split the 2 private dwellings, and one had the 2 doors on the side and that came into 2 private dwellings. And he said, "What do you got?" And it was a great question, and a smart kid. And so as Ricky said, now with all this stuff that you can do online and share and such, we're getting people who are paying attention, who are helping us. So there you go.
Well, and we're all talking, everybody on this panel, Bobby and guys, we teach and we preach leadership and we talk about it and everything else. And Jay, I know I've kind of bounced around you a little bit. I know for sure I wanted you to bring up Chief O'Hagan's talk, and I don't know if this is the time for it, if you want to cover something else first, but I saw that. I looked at the newsletter, and somebody just posted the pictures, the picture of the plaque, the picture of the funeral, which we'll talk about at the end here, which was by God believable, with the support and the turnout. But the talk, we talk about leaders, John talks about all the time, Jay, you and I talked about this the other day, about how sometimes leaders, I don't want to say they're born, but something happens and they do something. And I don't know if this is the time to talk about Chief O'Hagan's talk, or if you wanted to wait a few minutes, but
no, this is good. When John T. O'Hagan is probably one of the more famous chief of departments that the New York City Fire Department ever had. He was a World War II veteran that saw considerable battle time in the South Pacific. He was a paratrooper. I think he was a Marine, and he was like a veteran of Iwo Jima. He saw considerable battle time, and he came back, and he was a very bright man, and he got on the fire department, and that just kind of fueled his intellectual curiosity. And he went to college, and he was, at the time, he was considered a real rising star. I think he was the captain of Rescue 1, and he became a battalion chief, went to the 9th Battalion in Midtown, was a deputy chief in the 3rd Division in Midtown, and rapidly rose through the ranks. And he was, at the time, the chief of department's test, what chief of department's rank was a test. And he took the test and he wrote number 1. And he was kind of looked down upon by the hierarchy at the time, because he was this young whippersnapper kind of a guy, and who's this guy, and he's number 1, and they wanted to bypass him and take either the number 2 or the number 3 guy, because the city's New York State Civil Service allows for that. You could take the 1 out of 3, and he threatened to sue them. He says, you have to come up with a reason why you're not going to give me the chief of department stuff. So they promoted to chief of department, but he didn't have his the backing of his staff. his staff were the old Buffaloes, and again, they were looking down at him because he was such a young guy. And he happened to be in Chicago when this happened, and he got a little bit of a delayed notification, and he flew back to New York City, and he got to the site of the 23rd Street fire in the morning, and he was aghast what he saw, and he got there for the last fireman being removed was Fireman Carl Lee from Ladder 7, and there was 2,000 firemen on the scene. Guys came from home. When there was a change of tour in the morning, guys left their firehouses and they went to the scene. So there was 2,000 firemen on the scene. And after they put Fireman Carl Lee's body into the coroner's wagon, he had everybody go to Madison Park, Square Park, right across the street. And like you said, Rick, this was his leadership moment. He gathered everybody together. He had them stand at attention. This is the worst day at the time in 1966. The New York City Fire Department was 100 years old. In the 100-year history of the New York City Fire Department, this was a horrific day. He says, I know we all died a little bit in there today. And he had everybody remove their helmets, and they all had a moment of silence. And it's okay, let's go to work. And that made him. That 10 minutes made him as a leader. You're talking to guys who were actually there. And they said, we would have done anything for that man at that time. And so whatever resistance he was getting from his staff officers disappeared, because they knew that he had the backing of the rank and file, who were all also World War II vets and Korean War vets. And he saw the moment and he grabbed it, and that made him.
Well, like we've said before, and John, you've talked about it, all of us have talked about, Mikey, Terry, about how a single event sometimes can kind of project someone into that, to where they should be or what they needed or whatever. It just and again, these are a lot of the things to our listeners. This is the stuff, unless you do the homework, unless you really get into the back matter, if you will, of a particular incident, you don't really hear about that. And the picture, Jay, in your newsletter is pretty dramatic of him standing there and you can't even see them all. You can just see what is the beginning of a sea of firefighters all standing there, lined up, like you said, as he's talking to them. And again, without digging that, without looking at this stuff and talking about, you don't hear about Lieutenant Fox. You don't hear about, could you imagine a fire service world without Vinnie Dunn if that had been the other way around? To be able to get so much of this, and I guess I have a question for you that's come up over the years, and I'll ask you, Jay, or anybody else. And this is just the floor matter, that we talked about how that the terrazzo and that type of floor can mask, hide what's going on underneath it. If I remember right, it was like 5, 6. I mean, it was pretty deep. That if you went in the building, I remember John Norman talking years ago about, you actually, after the years of building up the floor, the old floors, you actually, I think you had to walk up a little bit if you walked into place, because there was so much on top of that original floor. 5, 6 inches thick at least.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Or a foot or something. I forget, it was something just.
I think it was 5 inches, which is
okay.
Significant. That's a lot of weight. The floors at the World Trade Center were 4 inches. So there you go.
Well, and then I know in your report you talked about once the collapse occurred, there was drums of lacquer in the cellar that would ignite it. That,
yes.
God, if you can make this any worse, I don't think you can make it up.
Yeah. It was the not only the collapse happened, it just kept compounding, and the fire kept spreading to other buildings, and there were collapse considerations, and the fuel. That this was the building on 22nd Street was an artist's paintings preservation place where they would bring their paintings in and they would spray them with lacquer and preserve them. And so obviously you had hazardous materials there. You had hydrocarbons, and fire reached that. And so it just, you know, it was like, all right, one more brick for the load. Here we go. We've got another, you know, something else going on. And like you mentioned earlier, a lot of the quiet heroism that went on that day is relatively unreported. You know, as I was digging through the different reports about 23rd Street, one of them that struck me was the combination of Engine 14 and Rescue 1 trying to advance a 2.5-inch line down an inferno on 22nd Street, and again, nobody, I couldn't get a name of anybody that was on that line, but a couple different publications mentioned that, how dramatic that was, that these guys, and Vinny Dunn mentioned it as well when I spoke to him about it, how it was such a dramatic sight trying to seeing them trying to advance that line down into that cellar.
Well, and let's throw this to God. I wish we had Bobby. I wish these were longer than an hour-ish. You know, I mean, we always talk about that. But if I think we could throw this, because, you know, Bobby and Terry and I can, all three of us, we can say this. We've got three, for our listeners, three absolute, and I will say the word, legends from the FDNY and the fire service with us today, with Jay Jonas and John Salka and Mike Dugan. I throw this to you, maybe Jay first, and John and Mikey. Let's kind of head down that path here. Just take us a little bit to get there. Lessons learned. We've talked about the stories that you might not hear about, you know, some of the heroism that went on there, and we talked earlier about the importance of the importance of pre-planning and getting out there looking at it. If we could talk about lessons learned from this incident, and it might be some of the things we're going to revisit again, if you guys could pick out, we'll start with Jay and then Mikey and John, if you could pick out a couple things for our listeners, our viewers, that you would send them in the way of a message as lessons learned from this incident, you know, what would they be?
Well, it is try to thwart this whole situation before it happens. Trying to spot some of these hazards, such as the terrazzo floor, and the numerous other alterations and additions that were constructed without the approval of the buildings department. And not only maybe take some enforcement action against them, but you know, we have that CIDS program, which is Critical Information Dispatch System. We would get this information to the responding units as they're responding. And I think that would have been the way to save guys' lives on 23rd Street, because they were, the firemen that got hurled into the cellar, they thought they were in a pretty good spot. You know, that they thought that it wasn't that smoky, it was a little hazy, and, you know, it wasn't like they were venturing too deep. You know, and they got caught by a flashover or something like that. No, these guys, they were making an examination. They were stretching a line. They were just looking around, trying to see what they could do, and you know, the whole thing went bad quickly.
Well, and we get hung up nowadays. I love, and you know, we've all talked before about some of those people out there that are talking about legacy furniture, like we were sleeping on like hemp and rock and stones back in the 60s, or this new lightweight construction, which isn't new. We've talked about the silent killers of lightweight construction of floors, because about the time you go through, well, this wasn't lightweight construction, and yet they had no indication. And like you said, Jay, I'm sitting there thinking about it. Terry and I were just texting. Terry's like, I don't want to say nothing. I'm taking in so much here that, you know, they had no indication, and you know, nothing in the way of, you know, like you said, when you said, it kind of hit me when you said, well, they thought they were in a safe spot, a safe position. Who'd have thought?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And it wasn't that normal slap you in the face danger. You're like, you're crawling down a hallway, fire's rolling over your head. It's, boy, this is really bad, you know. And it wasn't like that. It was some hazy smoke. They knew they had a job, obviously, but that looked like it was okay. And you didn't have fire coming up through the floor. The floor was being eaten away down below. But which brings us back to the adage in the fire service is that there's never a stalemate at a fire. If you think you're tied with the fire, you're losing, because the longer that fire is burning, the more wood is being eaten away, the more steel is weakening. Whatever's resisting gravity is being attacked, and hope you're not in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Absolutely. It's just like you say, what was holding that building up is leaving via the smoke and flames, and we don't have and gravity's going to win eventually. Mikey, and guys, and I just want to remind our panel, we've got some minutes here. We can go past it for our viewers. Chief Halton and Sarah and them are really good with letting us. So we're going to move a little bit past the hour here, because this is a great show with some great information. So we're not in a hurry here. But Mike, throw it to you next, and then we'll go to John and Bobby. But Mikey, from your end, especially, all your time in the FDNY, Captain Dugan, especially on a truck company, from a truck company standpoint, lessons learned in general from this fire, Mike.
Well, I'm going to take it a little different tact, Rick, with lessons learned, because I worked with a guy up in Harlem, Tommy Donovan, whose brother was in 18 Engine and was sent out on hydrant inspection duty, and he wasn't with his crew when they responded. And his brother was the only member who survived besides the pump operator. And he was out writing hydrant summonses. And how one fire can change somebody's life, and it changed his life, and not always for the better. He had a very, very difficult time with survivor's guilt and everything else. There are a couple of things I think about that maybe we have to get people, if we have something like this, we have to get them help. We have to have people talk about it. And we have learned these lessons since 9/11 and even before that, but there was nothing back then. And so if your people are going to need help, you have to get them help. And the other thing is, always be ready to reach down and help someone else in the fire service, because I'm here today because of Vinny Dunn, because he helped me get my first article published. He pushed me to write for the fire service. He pushed me to get involved because he was my division commander. And he was just such a great man. And all of us are mentors. I don't care if you got a day in a job or 20, 40, 60 years in a job, you're a mentor to someone else. Be that mentor, help those people, and spread the word, and be good at what you do, and be good to other people in the fire service, and help lift them up.
Well, and it's a great point about the mentorship, because I think if we did that more, we'd be sharing more information. We talk all the time. It's amazing that you can ask people simple things like what happened in Hackensack, New Jersey, and they can't tell you. It's a great fire department, went through a tragedy with hundreds of lessons. There's so many incidents, so many things out there. You don't need a crystal ball to see what's going to happen next in the fire service. You just have to go back and look at what's already happened, because we just tend to just cycle things. And before I get to Johnny real quick, Jay, and who was it as a fire patrolman? Who was it that drew the map? I'm trying to remember.
A guy named Ed Popsicle, who ended up becoming a career fireman in Connecticut. He had a very illustrious career in Connecticut. But he was a fire patrolman, and he happened to see where the guys were. And once the collapse happened, and as you can imagine, mayhem ensued. And he had the foresight. He immediately sketched out where he thought the guys were. And he was 100% right. They found the guys exactly where he sketched out where he thought they were.
Well, another one of those, like we talk about the stories you don't hear a whole lot. I think somebody actually posted a picture of that actual drawing on Twitter.
I think he still has it. There's a lieutenant in my division, John and I know him well, named Timmy Klett, and he actually worked with him, and he has this drawing. He still has it, and it's really a a fire service historical document now. Hopefully someday he can give it to the museum and they will post it, the fire museum, and they would post it prominently someplace.
That would be something to be able to do that for people to be able to see that.
Okay. I hate to interrupt, but this is kind of interesting. And Jay and John, Mike, you'd probably appreciate this. You might know this person. Finley Manhattan. He says, my grandfather was killed at this fire, and I am the only legacy of this fire currently on the job.
Yeah.
7 truck.
He was a lieutenant in 7 truck. Yeah.
Correct. And that's where his grandfather was. Yep.
And his father.
He doesn't mention his dad, but he says his grandfather was killed at the fire. So,
Yeah.
And he was no kid either. Jay, do you remember how old Finley was? He was a pretty senior dude. You look at the picture of his face.
Yeah. He was not a young guy.
lighten up with the senior crap, will you?
Well, and John, it's kind of funny. Jay mentioned, I think I in class, I always tell people your absolute favorite company officer, Lieutenant Tim Klett from 88 Engine and that. But John, what lessons learned from your end? And I know, like I said, it doesn't have to pertain even to the fire, but what would you send to our viewers, our listeners from all this?
Well, actually, I mean, it does pertain to the fire because I just go back to, and it's so true in a broader sense of all of Jay's articles, newsletters. Those words really don't suffice. But in this one in particular, some of the things we've talked about today, I just started to write a few things down, and having read it, of course, several times, like Bobby said earlier. I mean, building construction, building interconnection, and the value of familiarity with your buildings, right? Command, the fact that the chiefs that night, they took strategic command and they deployed people into the buildings and they covered the exposures. They even sent people around the back, our exposure 3 or everybody else's exposure Charlie, which is not done a lot in the FDNY. We don't really consider the buildings on the other street a lot, but that night apparently enough information became available to them that they went in that direction. Jay told 2 great stories of leadership. Leadership really shined through that night at the 23rd Street fire in lots of different places, and some of it, as he said, untold stories of leadership, dramatic leadership that nobody even really knew that it happened, and it was dramatic stuff. Fire ground orientation, which just came up again with that map, with that fire patrolman, knowing where people were, and the orientation of the second floor of one building, or the first floor rather of one building, was wholly over the basement of a building on the street behind it. Really dramatic stuff that we don't see a lot, that all sort of came to the surface. And what's great about Jay's stories, what's great about Jay's reports of these historic fires is every one of them is a lesson. It's not just a story. It's not just a newspaper article. There's always the second part at the end that says lessons learned. And then he starts pulling up other fires, similar fires, FDNY documents, firefighting procedures, and he ties all that stuff in. And whether or not your fire department participates or has firefighting procedure, whether or not they're similar to the FDNYs or not, they really are educational documents. They really, I mean, I'm certainly not qualified to say this, but they're like college level. They're like college level material on dramatic fires, and he's turned them into really learning tools.
Hey, Chief Lasky, sorry, I'll apologize. I'm a co-host of a show that I've literally sat here and said nothing, but I've written a page of notes, and I'm the topic and the stories are so informative and helpful. So my apologies for that, but I did want to ask Chief Jonas, so what currently today in FDNY, how's this fire remembered? How does the department kind of handle this time of year and remember this specific event?
Well, it's ironically, it happens at a time when we have our own fire department Memorial Day. It's usually the second week in October, and the fire occurred right around that time. But it has its own day. Like there's a memorial service that's taking place this morning at the site of the 23rd Street collapse, and the companies that suffered the losses, Engine 18 is now Squad 18, Ladder 7, the 7th Battalion, the 3rd Division. That they all, present and former members gather at the site, and sometimes they have a mass. They announce it on the department order that a memorial for the 23rd Street collapse, and there's a plaque on the building where the site once was. So they recognize it and they pay homage to it. And like we mentioned earlier, absent of 9/11, this is the greatest life loss in the history of the New York City Fire Department. And there were other large events, but this one far eclipsed them. This was 12, so something that we stop and we pause and we take a moment to reflect on it. So.
And Jay, isn't there, and I may have missed this already, but the current fire academy was, you noted, was constructed in 1977.
Yes.
And, that being said, the streets are named after the fallen, are they not?
Yes. If you go to the New York City Fire Academy, there are street names on every one of the streets that go around the fire academy, and the 12 that were killed on at the 23rd Street collapse, all those streets are named after those firefighters that were killed on that day.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely incredible too. We've been to some places, Mike, you've been there. We've talked about it, where they've lost firefighters in line of duty, and you wouldn't know it. There's not a picture on the wall. There's not a name anywhere, and it's not about anything other than honoring those that sacrificed that day, and never forgetting. And you guys know, the whole never forget thing from such a horrible tragedy on September 11th, and you see a lot of times I'll post never forgetting means never forgetting, and we're going to end the show that way in a little bit like that. But let's kind of look to close things out here, and we'll just go around the table here. But Mikey, closing thoughts, bud?
Yeah, closing thoughts is Frank Brannigan, right? The building is renovated, and if you don't know that, you're going to have a problem. Know your buildings, know your district, and know what you're getting involved in every time you go in a building. And like the cops say, if you see something, say something. Take a picture, pass it on to the brothers and sisters in your department, your neighboring departments, and everything else. If there's a problem in a building, you want everyone in the department and the district to know about it.
Absolutely. And Captain Dugan, if someone wanted to get a hold of you, I know we do this, they want to get a hold of you, come out and they want you to consult or teach for them, whatever. What's the easiest way? Email?
Email. Real simple. It's my last name, Dugan, Dugan, FIRE at AOL.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you. John, closing thoughts, Chief Salka?
It's really, I guess, it's really just all about training. We can talk about 1,000 different topics and 1,000 different subjects and 1,000 different fires and lessons learned. And gosh, it goes on and on in magazines and books and articles and hands-on training, and it just never ends. And it's people just need to really, if you want to be involved in the fire service, you got to be involved. If you want to be involved in the fire service, you want to be an officer, you want to be a trainer, you want to be a firefighter, you got to, now we say this all the time, Rick, don't we, in our class? Now that you're on a job, get into the job. You got to be into the job, and into the job means a lot of things, but it means pay attention to what's going on, learn something new every day, train all the time, stay on top of your game, whether you're a firefighter, whether you're a company officer riding in the front seat, whether you're a chief. Everybody's got a job to do, and we all know one little slip up, one little oversight at the scene of a fire can be dramatic. So everybody's really got to, pay attention to what's going on and do your job.
Little indicators, like you said, John, and Jay mentioned them already, past experiences, being able to tell someone that doesn't want to move up. I mean, we've been there before where, I remember Chris DiPiola's first basement fire. He's like, you want me to go down there? And I'm like, yeah, we're going down there, not knowing, for on his end, what lies on the other end. And Jay said it, you got guys pushing people up through fire that are like, this is not something that you normally do, and knowing that they're going to come out on the other side is just incredible. Terry, closing thoughts, bud?
Well, I don't know that I could, add a lot to what I've said, but the one thing that keeps coming to mind is that I think a lot of times or sometimes people get into this business and they approach it from a reactive standpoint, in that we're going to sit at the station and make calls. And so, sure, that's a phase or a portion of this job, but the more important part of this job is very proactive, and that is the day-to-day learning and the training and the drilling. And the only other thing I add, and I just say from my standpoint and what I do in my day-to-day, and we just had this conversation after staff meeting Monday morning, and that was pulling up the schedule for our guys. And when you start looking at the amount of stuff that we can throw out there to occupy their day, and then turn around and realize that in doing so, we're limiting and diminishing their ability to go out and do the things that we really need them to do, which is walk through these buildings. And the only other thing too, Chief, and you used to say this a lot when you were around here, is that every single time we roll out of the door, turn that into something. And if you're answering an EMS call, go out there and flow a hydrant. If you're in a building on an EMS call, take a chance to look around. And I think that those are the things that unfortunately we get lax in, and I think that's something that probably is one of the most important tools we have, is the ability to go out there and look through these buildings and then communicate what we find with those around us.
It's a great point, buddy. Great point. Bobby, we're going to finish with Jay. I want to get to Chief Halton here. Closing thoughts, Chief Halton?
Just a couple of real quick things. Chief Jonas said that the heroic hose stretch, the guys battling that fire, it made me think of the Lionel Richie fire, the Macaulay Culkin fire. There's been, the engine companies, and remember, that's part of the load, right? When we start flowing lots of water, we've got all kinds of, we don't teach water chutes and things like that anymore. All that stuff is so critically important because that's more dead load, right? So that popped in my head right away. But to steal a line from my dear friend John Salka, I felt like a sack of garbage sitting on this hangout today, because there's not three finer firefighters in the world today than Chief Jonas, Chief Salka, and Chief Dugan. If you really want to sit down and learn, those are three people you should listen to carefully. They're excellent gentlemen. They're excellent role models. If you want to learn about leadership, they're the guys to look to. But even more importantly, when it comes to command presence, there's few people on this planet like those three gentlemen today. And thank you very much, Terry and Ricky, and for putting this show together. And thank you so much to Chief Salka, Chief Jonas, Captain Dugan, for not only your service to your city and our country and the citizens, but to the example that you have made by the ways you lived your lives. You're truly the kind of people who we can look up to, and we do.
Well, and that was
Thank you.
very well said, Bobby. Just incredible, but can't agree with you anymore. I want to point something out before we ask Jay Jonas, Deputy Chief Jay Jonas, for his closing remarks. John, you say this all the time when we talk about Jay in class, because I know you two are very close. You Proby school together, Rescue 3, right backwards. With Rescue 3, you, Jay, John Norman were working for Pete Lund. God, I just wish I could have ridden out on one of those calls.
We were actually riding sideways, but go ahead.
But before, and Jay, John says this in class all the time. We talk about you, and I want, because a lot of our viewers, I'm getting bombarded with comments. I wish they would do hashtag FE Talk, but the compliments, I'm reading stuff. Incredible leaders, mentors. Thanks for sharing this story. We need to learn from our losses, and just to help prevent all this great stuff. I want to throw something in there that I know John brings up all the time about Jay. And for our viewers, take a look at Chief Jay Jonas right now. You see that expression he said before about Chief Vinny Dunn being like, "Where's Waldo?" Look at the expression on Jay Jonas's face. That's how he runs fires. There's no screaming. There's no hollering. John, you've said it how many times? Jay is actually, you say in class, you go, he runs fires, whether it was the recent tragedy in the Bronx with the multiple losses of civilians, responds as a deputy. His voice never elevates. He never seems rattled. He reminds me, John, of Chief Kennedy. You know, I know one of your idols. I just look at Jay and Jay, your demeanor as a leader. I wish I could have worked for you, buddy. I wish I could have worked for you. But closing thoughts from Chief Jonas.
Well, we have to encourage our younger firefighters to be a little inquisitive. You know, the old story about those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. You got to make that. You got to make them live that. For example, the New York City Fire Department has a program of annual firehouse inspection. It's done in the spring. It's an annual rite of passage for, you know, welcoming us into the nice weather and putting aside the winter. And you know, the firefighters work hard cleaning their firehouses, getting their apparatus up to snuff, and cleaning their tools and everything. Is kind of like a big spring cleaning kind of a thing. And the deputy chief goes to the firehouse to inspect it. And one of my engine companies, a good engine company, had a spare apparatus for their annual inspection. And so you're not going to clean up the spare apparatus the way you're normally assigned apparatus, but it was presentable. It looked good. But this spare apparatus belonged to somebody else for its lifespan. And there was a memorial on the side of the pumper by the crew cab. And it said in loving memory, and they listed like 5 guys. And I had a young probie with me. I says, well, how long have you had this spare? And the probie said, about 3 months. And he said, okay, I get it. Whose rig did this used to be? And what do you mean? I said, there's a memorial on the side of this fire truck. And in loving memory of them. And you couldn't decide to take the time to look up who these guys were and how they died. And I said, by the time I leave here today, I expect an answer. And so, you know, I write about these fires, and I got a lot of accolades for my article on the wall bounce fire. I got a lot of accolades for the 23rd Street collapse. Some famous fires that guys may have heard about, but they didn't know the particulars. And there's so many lessons to be learned, and we got to keep teaching those lessons. Like I said, if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And wouldn't it be a shame if guys continued to pass away for the same reasons that they passed away in the past, and especially if those reasons are preventable. You know, like this fire, and you know, we touched upon the fire in 1960 from Broadway and Grand Street. They were cellar fires. We don't win many cellar fires. Cellar fires are tough fires, and very tough on the engine companies trying to advance hose lines down the cellars, and usually it's a narrow, rickety stair, and there are no partitions, and fires just extending, and you could be exposing gas meters. You know, again, the problems abound. You know, what's being stored down there. For instance, my next newsletter, I'm almost done writing it, is about the Father's Day fire that occurred on Father's Day 2001, and all those things were in effect. And cellar fire, and how do we beat cellar fires, and what are the things that we got to look for, and you know, there's a reason why we stretch a backup line to the cellar entrance when a hose line is being advanced down the cellar. The reason is to give those guys protection in case they got to get out. So, you know, if you ask a fireman, how come we stretch a backup line? It's just because that's what the book says. So, well, there's a reason why the book says that, and you know, it's a lot easier to remember it because you know the reason than just trying to memorize it. So, just to piggyback onto what Mike was saying about, you know, reading books from Frank Brannigan and Vinnie Dunn, I would use those as occasionally I take the train to work, and I would, those would be my train books. I'd be sitting on the train, it's an hour and a half commute going into Hoboken. I take the PATH train across, and I always felt that that'd be a good way. That's a good way to kick off my my night tours, to get an hour and a half reading of Frank Brannigan or Benny Dunn, and it just gets you excited about seeing things during your tour of duty. Says, wow, I just read about that. Frank Brannigan talked about loft buildings and the columns, and this is how they're secured. So and like John said, you got to get into the job. You can't just be in it. You got to be into it, and that's how you can get a calm demeanor. If I wasn't secure in what I was thinking about, I'd be a hot mess. But if you have been, if you've been there before, you've read about it, you've studied stuff like this, it's easier to keep calm because you know what to expect and what's the best course of action to combat it.
And I like that, like you guys, everybody's talked about getting in a job, be a part of the job, make a difference. If you have any time on the job whatsoever, remember there's always people coming behind you that you need to share this information with. There's plenty of other avenues out there. It's the conferences that we go to. It's FDIC. It's the magazines that we read. There's so many ways. There's apps. There's so many ways to stay connected and to be a student of this incredible profession. Jay, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, I know I mentioned this before, remind them your email address one more time.
All right. So, I got my email address when I was a captain. So, so it's the abbreviation for captain, CAPT JAYL6 at AOL.com.
Perfect. John, email?
Email firecom training, FIRECOM training at AOL.com.
Perfect. Terry?
Yeah, it's first initial last name, T McGrath, MCGRATH at cityoflewisville.com.
Yahoo, City of Lewisville.
Terry, thanks for hanging in with us. I know you got to be at City Hall. Bobby, just so we're clear with, I know they can turn to the magazine, but I know you have a new one, new email address for people to make note of.
Hey, the easiest way to get me is just Bobby Halton at Gmail. Bobby Halton at Gmail.
That's perfect. Well, guys, thank you. So, this is, I know this is the longest that Terry and I have went with the show. And Bobby said at the beginning, don't worry about it because we've got an incredible topic. To Deputy Chief Jay Jonas and Battalion Chief John Salka and Captain Mike Dugan. Oh my God, just thank you guys. You're Bobby and I are Bobby's always with us here pretty much unless he's traveling on the show, especially being the boss. He's involved in all kinds of incredible things in the fire service. But just like Bobby said, it's just to have the three of you on here. You're three very good friends of ours. It's just incredible. The comments, like I said, I wish I could send them all to you that the people are sending here. But thank you so much. Hey, for our viewers and our listeners, and guys, hang on, don't hang up after we're done here. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on the web. So all you gotta do is find us there. Our next show date for Terry and I, and for Chief Halton, is November 21st. You can always find, there's Fire Engineering always has some great people on Wednesdays. You've got the radio shows at night. There's some great stuff going on. No reason, tune them in when you're working, when you're doing your daily duties, replay it, whatever. It's incredible. In closing, and as always, Terry and I always ask you to please keep the men and women and the armed forces in your thoughts and prayers. And remember this, folks, never forgetting means never forgetting. Be safe out there, and God bless you.